New year, fresh start, time to recreate myself. What will I find when I walk down this path? New friends, new goals, new challenges to be met. I will meet them and I am going to succeed. New year, fresh start, it's time for self-discovery.
Episode 4, Rivalry. Essence Ball. Apparently, this was the major sporting event at Arceados Academy, and schools like it. As Noah had not participated in schools such as these, the concept of Essence Ball was lost on him. When he asked what Essence Ball was, Miss Vathai said it was like if soccer, dodgeball, and gladiatorial sports had a three-way and had a magical baby as a result. She couldn't explain any more that morning, as she had little time and a ton of obligations to handle before the students started their first classes. Gregor had also already went to his first class when Noah had arrived, so he couldn't ask the head coach either. The more that Noah thought about Miss Vathai's description, the more confused and amused he became. What the hellos was that even supposed to mean? Before they parted ways, Miss Vathai told him that rather than have a second period class, there would be a massive pep rally to pump up the students for their first major game. His first class of the morning went as expected, and thankfully, without any odd incident. At the start of the second period class, Noah took his place and awaited for the bell to ring.
Okay, may I please have your attention? We're not going to be having our test over demonic children's stories like we had planned.
A collective cheer rippled through the class.
Instead, we're going to have a pep rally for an upcoming Essence Ball.
Before he could finish, a wildfire of excitement and passion overtook the students. They cheered out loudly and waved their hands about. Similar declarations resonated from other rooms, as the other classes had been told about the rally as well. The students in Noah's room turned to one another, and they started having little conversations about the upcoming game, teams, and a lot of other strange concepts that Noah was unfamiliar with.
All right, if you would please proceed to the gym, we're going to have it there.
The students rose from their seats and flowed into the hallway like a river breaking through a dam. Noah followed them, but stood in the doorway rather than attempt to mingle in with the hundreds of students, rapidly moving toward their destination. Another teacher had the same idea, and she stood within the doorway of the classroom, across from Noah's. The woman had tan skin, golden wheat-colored hair, and a pair of steel blue eyes. She wore a white lab coat over what appeared to be a crimson dress. The woman's heels matched the color of the dress. Noah walked up to her once the last of the students had slipped past them.
So, I guess that Essence Ball is a pretty big deal, huh?
Before Noah had walked up to her, the woman hadn't even noticed him. Now that he spoke to her, she regarded him strangely, with a critical stare, arms crossed over her chest, and she even stepped back a little bit from him.
A pretty big deal. Are you trying to be cute with me, or are you just really not aware? Do you seriously not know about Essence Ball? Were you homeschooled or something?
Well, kind of. Essence Ball isn't a thing where I'm from. Hi, I'm Noah Cruz.
Noah extended a hand toward her. For a long moment, the woman just studied his hand, as if it were some sort of bizarre specimen. She gently took his hand, though.
Ah, I see. Well, Essence Ball has been around for like 150 years, and to students like ours, it's a pretty big deal. My name is Isa Montebella. We should get going.
She took her hand back and then trailed after the last few students. When Noah followed her, Miss Montebella glanced back at him for only a second before increasing her pace. Noah didn't. and he allowed the distance between them to increase. A small degree of unease flickered inside him, and he watched her disappear around a corner. Had he said something that offended her? Was he being too flirty unintentionally? He certainly wasn't trying to make anyone uncomfortable. Noah's stomach vibrated wearily at the notion of such a possibility. Noah entered the gym. Much like the welcome ceremony, the makeshift stage had been set up, while the students sat in fold-out chairs before it. Deafening blends of conversation wove together and assaulted Noah's ears. It wasn't all that unpleasant, and actually he grinned when he saw the anticipation for whatever was going to happen during the rally. The teachers from the other classes stood around the perimeter of the chairs against the wall. The teacher whom Noah had just met, Miss Montbella, stood on the far side of the gym, and she watched the student body with bored, unenthused eyes. Miss Miyoshi stood several feet away from the entrance. Her arms were crossed. Her mouth had formed a scowl. She watched the crowd of students, as fiercely as any predatory bird or ravenous jungle cat. Headmistress Darboux, Miss Vautheis, and Mr. O'Malley sat on the 3 chairs beside the podium on the stage. Miss Vautheis stood up and got behind the podium. A great hush fell over the student body. She smiled broadly.
Hey everybody! Are you guys ready for some Essence Ball?
Incredible roars of glee shattered the silence that had pervaded moments before. Some students rose to their feet and waved their arms about, while others simply clapped while seated.
All right, settle down. Please, allow me to introduce to you your Essence Ball head coach, Mr. O'Malley!
Mr. O'Malley stood up and the crowd cheered again. Those who had known the Essence Ball coach from years before jumped to their feet and waved about with the same degree of energy one might expect from concert goers. Many of the first-year students became infected with that delight, and they also jumped to their feet. All at once, the students hushed once Mr. O'Malley raised a clenched fist above his head, a sort of rallying battle gesture.
Everybody! So this is going to be a great year. For the seasoned students, you all know all too well how great we are at Essence Ball.
A loud burst of cheer erupted from the student body.
For the new students, you may think you've come to understand school spirit for Essence Ball. But you've never been infused by Arceados Academy's school spirit.
Another thunderous roar broke through the air, albeit a little longer than the first one.
Our rivals are the Jokers from St. Gabriel's Academy.
A loud boo filled the expanse of the gymnasium. Even Miss Miyoshi contributed her voice along with the students.
They beat us last year for our first game of the season. But this year, they are going down!
Mr. O'Malley waved his arms about aggressively, and the students all jumped to their feet and started howling jeers, whoops, hollers, and other forms of extreme jubilation. Noah covered his ears, but he couldn't help but relish in the students' infectious spirit.
All practices for the varsity, junior varsity, and first-year teams are starting tonight. Unfortunately, Mrs. Dialgo is out for next few of months due to maternity leave, so we'll be having a volunteer assistant coach step in. I've not found the right person yet, but you don't worry, they are going to be awesome.
Headmistress Darboux stood up, and the crowd instantly fell silent. She grinned widely, which sent sudden chills throughout Noah's spirit.
Oh, don't you worry, Mr. O'Malley. I have the perfect teacher to assist you in mind.
Her eyes swept across the gym. Was it Noah's imagination, or was she looking directly at... Of course she was.
All right, everybody, form up. We'll have a practice skirmish between junior varsity and the freshman team. Varsity players number off evens and odds. Evens go with the freshmen, and odds go with the junior varsity team. Game starts in 5. We play to 3 points.
Mr. O'Malley turned to Noah as the large cluster of students split into 2 sizable groups.
If you want to sit on the sidelines and watch for a while, that would be fine. It's an easy game to pick up. And all it really requires is just making sure students don't get too rough.
Right. From what I've heard, Essence Ball sounds like an interesting game.
Oh, it is. Where I had my career-ending injury. I was on one of the pro teams.
Noah moved over to one of the bleachers as Mr. O'Malley began casting a spell. The air rippled with energy, and suddenly, the gym floor transformed and expanded. While the space between the bleachers remained the same from Noah's perspective, the playing field became a unique and isolated zone all its own. The ground became barren, rocky, and craggy, and large mountain mesas rose up, creating massive obstacles. A pair of magical screens appeared over the playing ground, each displaying 2 different teams. From the looks of it, the area of the playing ground had become miles long, with a large river running through the center of it, and mesas on either side. 2 brilliant shimmering portals stood at each end of the playing field. The longer that Noah watched the playing field, the more gnarled and warped his spirit became. The spell that Gregor had enacted encapsulated the students in a sort of pocket dimension completely separate from the gym, the school, and the world.
What in the actual hellos is this game?
To someone not familiar with it, I'm sure it looks really confusing.
Noah blinked for a moment, and he looked in the direction from where the voice had come from. Miss Vottheis walked across the floor toward him. She sat beside him on the bleachers.
Miss Vottheis, what are you doing here?
Oh, Demi. You can call me Demi when the students aren't around.
She gestured to the playing field.
At the moment, they're in their own dimensional space, so, for the most part, you and I are alone.
All right. Demi, so what are you doing here?
Are you kidding? I come to all the Essence Ball practices. I really love this sport. I played in high school and college. You may not realize it, but before Mage Bloods got a hold of it, Essence Ball was strictly a Halosian sport played by demons and devils only.
Huh. I didn't know that. So you didn't go pro.
Oh, no. I was good, but nothing like Gregor. He was just incredible.
So what happened? He mentioned he had a career-ending injury.
Demi frowned and lowered her gaze for a moment.
A rival player got way too rough during a game and forcibly slammed Gregor to the ground from the top of a 3,000-foot tower.
I'm sorry. What? A 3,000-foot tower? How did he survive?
He didn't. He had to be resurrected using powerful and expensive spells. Even then, his body was a mess, and he spent 5 years in physical therapy and rehabilitation. It's a miracle that he's as fit as he is now.
Warmth returned to her face with the dawning of a smile.
His love of the game was so intense that he still dedicates his life to it, even if he can't ever play on the field again as a real player. Arceados Academy is very lucky to have him here.
Noah studied the 2 magic screens displaying the teams. Each of the teams stood in huddles in front of one of the 2 portals on either side of the field. Even though the distance didn't look great from where Noah sat, within the pocket dimension, it appeared to be separated by at least a mile. The terrain of the field had been miniaturized, and so everything fit within the confines of the gym floor. Teeny tiny little versions of the students stood on the terrain before the smaller versions of the gateways. The 2 student teams moved out of their huddles, and they started to take preparatory stances together, ready to sprint.
I'm confused. There isn't anything that tall in the arena at the moment.
Oh, well, that's because the terrains are always random. Sometimes students play in isolated, natural environments like this one, and other times they play in ruins or abandoned cities. Maybe I should explain the point of Essence Ball.
She pointed to one of the magic screens.
Do you see the two shimmering gateways and how each team is standing in front of it?
Yeah, I'm guessing they are goal portals of some kind, right?
Right. Once the game actually starts, the teams will leave one of their players to guard the goal, while the others venture off to get the essence ball. The point of the game is to get the essence ball to the other team's goal while preventing them from getting it into yours.
That sounds simple. Who has the ball first?
That's the fun part. The essence ball is hidden on the terrain somewhere, and after each goal is scored, it teleports to a new spot. First team to 10 points wins.
Oh. Wow.
Oh, it gets better. Okay, so notice how each of the students is wearing a special armband on one of their arms? That armband does 5 things. Firstly, it completely cuts off their magical power, so the game is totally fair regardless of a player's race and innate abilities. Secondly, it allows for players to conjure forth blast spheres.
Blast spheres?
Yes! Blast spheres are magical projectiles that can be hurled at enemy players. If a player gets hit by a blast sphere, they are brutally killed in a violent fashion via explosion. Hence the name, Blast Sphere.
Noah's eyes widened, and his mouth fell ajar.
Don't worry. While wearing the armband and playing in the pocket dimension, players usually can't permanently die in the game. Players who are eliminated have to sit out until a goal is made by either team. Once a goal is made, they respawn by their goal.
So then, what happened with Gregor in the fall?
Well, that's because the rival player removed Gregor's armband and then threw him from the top of the tower.
Oh.
The next thing the armbands do is allow the players to actually pick up the essence ball. While players have possession of the essence ball, they can't summon the blast spheres. Their teammates have to protect the ball holder while they make their way to the goals. The last thing the armbands do is empower the players to drastically increase stamina, speed, and they can jump long distances. Still, to be good at essence ball, you gotta be in shape.
A whistle blew from somewhere, although it sounded ethereal and otherworldly.
Hey, where is Gregor? I don't see him on the screens or on the map.
Oh, he's a referee for this game. You can't see him, nor can the students. Usually, real Essence Ball games will have 4 or 5 referees who are on the field, making sure players are playing with the rules, nothing too dangerous happens, and to mitigate against any unforeseen issues. Referees are usually invisible except to themselves or to the other referees.
Ah, that's really neat. Are coaches usually referees?
No, usually it's not allowed for official Essence Ball games, but it's okay for practice though.
The students started moving on the field, and the magic screens started showing images of different players. One of the freshman players wore a distinct blue hijab. Noah grinned. He glanced over at Demi, and just as he was about to say something, the words died on his tongue. Noah glanced past her, at the figure standing in the doorway to the gym. A person dressed in a black cloak. Even from that distance, the man's snarl could be seen as easily as the color of his clothes. Noah's eyes narrowed. A sudden curiosity flared within Demi's eyes, and so she turned to follow his line of sight.
Who's that?
I don't know. And that's a problem.
In an instant, Demi hopped to her feet, and she moved swiftly toward the man. Noah's gut twisted, and he gave the practice game a brief, forlorn glance before chasing after Demi. The mysterious figure retreated back into the hallways, and the gym doors slammed in his wake. That only seemed to enhance the growing anxiety within him. Demi ran faster too, with fists balled no doubt. The air contorted with a strange maleficence, and every nerve ending in Noah's body zapped with desperate alertness. Demi burst through the doors with considerable force, knocking them open.
Hey! Stop right there!
By the time Noah exited the gym, Demi was at the far end of the hallway. Her past experiences as an Essence Ball player obviously served her well. The air grew tenser the further Noah had moved, and a sudden tickling perked up his senses. His magical senses. Vile acid pooled at the bottom of Noah's stomach. In an instant, Noah summoned some of his magic and filtered it into his body. Not enough to draw attention, but certainly enough to be prepared for what might be lingering in the shadows. Demi flew around the corner, and seconds later, So did Noah. The mysterious figure had sprinted up the stairs, heading toward the second floor.
Stop right there!
She disappeared up the stairwell. Noah was now only a dozen steps behind her. A sort of latent buzzing greeted Noah as he stepped onto the second floor. It took a few moments for Noah to recognize the pattern of that buzzing, and it made the air crackle on the edge of hearing. Something was summoned. Demi stood in the middle of the hallway, and she stared at a figure who stood at the far end of the hallway. Noah studied the person. The individual wasn't wearing a black cloak.
Who are you? You better answer me, otherwise you're going to have some real trouble.
The figure stood with their back to Demi and Noah in the long, dark, lonely corridor. A slight odor drifted on the air, one that made the synapses in Noah's brain throb with recollection. It was such a familiar fragrance, and seconds later, he identified it. Several more figures stepped out of the classrooms beside the first individual, but their exact features were also obscured by the shadows. A noise thumped behind them, and Demi glanced behind Noah. Noah's palms became more moist, and he took a reassuring breath.
How many of them are back there?
6.
And added to the 4 in front of us, it seems like we have a little bit of a problem.
Who are they? Why are they here?
More like, who were they? You do realize none of these things were the person we followed, right?
Demi clenched her fists tightly. A subtle hum emerged from her body, and Demi's pupils illuminated with a bright orange radiance. Noah swallowed hard and peeked at her from the sides of his eyes. His insides swelled a little, which usually happened when someone from other dimensions, especially Helos, transformed and revealed more of their truer nature. A pair of reddish-blackish horns emerged from Demi's forehead. Her stature and muscles increased in size, and several sharp fangs peeked out past her lips. When Demi was finished unleashing more of her power, she was a good 2 feet taller than Noah. Her fingertips had morphed into jagged claws.
I'll take the 6 in the back. Can you handle the 4 in the front?
He stepped forward and approached the 4 ominous figures.
Yeah, no sweat. Maybe when I finish with mine, I'll help you with your group.
Thankfully, despite the gravity of the situation, Demi smirked at him with a toothy grin. In her current state, it looked damn right malicious.
If anything, Mr. Cruz, I'm going to finish first.
Demi pivoted and sprinted down the hall with her hands held open and poised for mauling. Noah focused on the figures ahead of him. The light was poor, and yet he still noticed their grisly features. Bloated dark gray flesh, disheveled rags for clothing, and wide blank stares. They moved closer to him with sagging postures, starving eyes, and drool dripping off of their lips. Faint vibrations of energy rippled on the air, most likely coming from the creatures' chests. For these creatures, the energy within their chests acted like batteries. One of the monsters stepped forward and pointed a decaying finger at Noah. It gurgled angrily at him, and then the 3 others sang out in refrain to the first one's call. From behind Noah, the sounds of squishy bodies slamming onto the floor caught his attention. Noah grinned as he held out his hand in front of him. His spirit danced wildly as the hunger from his anticipation soared to new heights. It had been a long time since Noah had the opportunity to summon his faithful partner, but now seemed as good a time as any. An area on his right forearm tingled with hot arcane power. It could not be seen because of his buttoned-up, long-sleeved shirt, but his silver-lined tattoo glowed with life. A silver light burst into life in his right palm, and 2 shafts of light emerged from either side. The hallway became bathed in beautiful illumination, and the creatures squinted and blocked their eyes from the intensity. When the brilliance in the hallway faded, Noah held a silver spear. Although it wasn't just any spear, It was EA, the Light Piercer. How long had it been since Noah and EA waltzed with one another? 10 years? 20? Regardless, EA's sleek haft sent long-forgotten trembles up through Noah's fingers. Noah closed his eyes, and someone else opened them. He crouched down and then sprinted toward the 4 creatures. Silent and lethal focus gripped his movements. The first creature lunged at him, but he simply shifted, dodged, and then stabbed the tip of EA into the monster's chests, right where the magical core resonated. Its eyes widened for a moment before its limbs fell limp. Noah pulled EA free and then twirled his spear around him with all of his strength. The other monsters fell back, being struck by both ends of the spear. Slowly, the 3 remaining monsters got to their feet and then growled at Noah. They shuffled closer to him, but Noah kept them back with a series of swift thrusts, stabs, and jabs. EA's point dug into their faces, arms, legs, and even stomachs. It was only when Noah pierced the center of their chests that the monsters finally fell dead. He felled one of the monsters and then backstepped away from the other 2. Noah glanced down at the hallway at Demi. Veins of energy trailed down her skin, and the veins casted light in the corridor. She had managed to tear one of the creatures completely in half, but the upper torso still crawled closer to Demi as she moved around. She punched the monsters to the ground over and over, but they kept getting up. At the moment, she tangled with 4 of them, while the 5th was nothing more than a half-thread of sorts. The 6th lay on the ground with its chest completely smashed in. It laid still with blank eyes.
The chest! Their arcane batteries are in the center of their chests! You have to smash Piercer or tear there!
For a brief moment, Demi gave him a curious look. Noah didn't miss that she noticed his spear. She only looked at him for a moment longer before she kicked one of the monsters in the face. It fell back, and then she punched it in the chest with so much force that it slammed into the wall with a tremendous thud. Before it had a chance to recover, Demi dug her hand into its chest and pulled out a hunk of rotten flesh. The monster fell still moments later. Noah ducked under the flailing limbs of one of the other monsters, and he twirled about again. The swift ends of the shaft knocked the pair of monsters around Noah and to the ground. EA zipped forward and punctured through another one of the monster's skulls. Noah pulled it out and then leaned back as its friend swiped a dirty fingernail grab at his face. EA's tip drove into the monster's chest, and then it fell limp on the spear. The monster whom Noah had stabbed in the head grabbed him by the arm before he had a chance to pull EA free. However, a massive devilic hand burst through the monster's chest, right where the battery was. Demi's black ichor-covered claws were but a couple of inches from Noah's face. In an instant, Noah dismissed EA, and the dead monster impaled on its tip fell to the ground before him. Demi freed her hand, and a fiery aura of energy coated her entire body. All of the shadows retreated back into nothingness, and Noah squinted and blocked his eyes from Demi's light. The fiery aura burned away all of the muck, gore, and filth from Demi's body. Once she was clean, her devilic features descended back into her body. She resumed her mage blood appearance.
Okay, firstly, I told you I would finish first. And secondly, what in the hellos was that?
Noah gave her an awkward smile.
Do you mean the monsters?
Demi crossed her arms over her chest, tilted her head, and then gave Noah a hard stare.
No, I mean you. Since when can you fight? I thought your specialty was languages, but you summoned a spear and you were fighting as if you'd done it before and... What are you? Like, really, what are you? You're not just a linguist.
Oh, well. I'm also kind of a artificer of sorts. I can make things.
Like silver chains to restrain fighting students?
Demi walked over to where the 4 bodies Noah had slain lay. She bent down and studied the expert holes pierced into the corpses.
Oh no, you're not also kind of an artificer. You are an artificer, aren't you? Languages are just a small facet of what you do, but the chain spell you used on the students wasn't something simple just anyone can do. And that spear, I felt its energy from down the hall. It wasn't just a simple weapon. It almost reminded me of...
Like what?
Demi didn't look at him at first, but instead she stared off into the darkness of the hallway. Her body had grown a little rigid. After a moment, she stood up and glanced at Noah.
No, it's nothing. If you were anything like that, I'd be able to feel it. However, I'm a little surprised. It's been a long time since I encountered an artificer. To be honest, I've never met a Mageblood one before. You Magebloods are full of surprises.
Noah let out an awkward chuckle. A violent hum had awoken in his soul, and he desperately just tried to quell its unease.
Would you be able to teach others how to do that? You know, make things?
Noah winced a little, and he averted his eyes away from her.
You know what? You're right. This isn't the time for this sort of discussion. I'm going to call the headmistress right now. She needs to be made aware of what happened. Would you mind waiting with me? You know, in case there are any other surprises laying about?
Sure.
Demi pulled out a cell phone and moved down the hall a little ways. Moments later, she said,
Hello, headmistress? We have a problem.
Noah knelt down and examined one of the broken clumps of undead flesh that decorated the hallway floor. This creature had not been a zombie, nor had it been a golem either. It was something different and twisted with a sort of sloppy maleficence. Bitter unease rocked Noah from the inside as he regarded the small spear wounds he and EA had inflicted. Sickly mist formed in his stomach, and it spread nausea within him. Looking back, Noah mentally kicked himself in the astral balls, and in turn he writhed in painful shame. Why did he summon EA? Why didn't he summon a generic weapon and just engage the creatures that way? A simple answer came to mind. He didn't have another weapon ready, and tattooed on him for immediate use. The monsters would not have waited for him to use the words of creation to create a new weapon. And even if they did, doing so would have planted even more suspicious seeds within Demi's mind. Unlike Seto and Kachina, Demi was a mature devil with a keen mind and perhaps a long memory. In that same vein of thought, summoning the silver shackles and chains would have created an even more awkward situation than the one he found himself in now. Despite his claims, Noah could only cast real spells in his native tongue. Fighting barehanded would have been foolish as well. Noah was strong and a battle-trained warrior, but those monsters were designed to fight warriors. The hallways were deathly quiet too. Whoever the person in black cloak was, they had gotten away. When Noah had first entered the second floor, he felt the trace echoes of summoning magic. Could these monsters have been summoned prior to the figure sneaking down to the gym? Perhaps. After all, summoning such creatures into existence on school property would have taken time, and Demi had trailed after the man with immense athletic speed.
Maybe we should make a sweep of the school to make sure more of the creatures aren't here.
Demi turned to regard him, and she was still on the phone. She nodded.
Mr. Cruz suggests that we should sweep the school to see if there are any more here. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Demi hung up the phone and then looked at Noah.
Headmistress Darboux is on her way here, and she'll help us search the premises. Until she gets here, we're to head back to the gym to protect the students, just in case.
Right. Sounds good to me.
Noah and Demi moved back through the corridors of Arceados Academy. A grim and potent silence had befallen the halls, and every open classroom door gave the pair slight pauses. Noah and Demi peeked into the classrooms and breathed sighs of relief upon finding them empty. When they got to the first floor, they stopped. A figure stood in the hallway, and her piercing eyes met with Demi's, and then Noah's. At first, magic crackled into Noah's palm, but he dismissed it as soon as he recognized the woman. Demi grinned widely. Headmistress Darboux wore a dark blue dress, matching heels, and even her glass frames matched her ensemble. Demi moved toward the headmistress, but Noah held out an arm in front of her.
What is it?
How do we know you're the real headmistress? Demi just called you.
Demi merely giggled, but the headmistress simply scoffed.
Miss Vartheis, did you and Mr. Cruz find any other unwelcome guests on your way back?
No, ma'am.
A wave of sheepish heat flared in Noah's cheeks as he licked his lips and lowered his gaze from the pair of women. The headmistress waved her fingers. Her eyes glowed with a spiraling dark blue energy, and a massive wave of the same colored magic blasted out in all directions. When the wave struck Noah, his body tingled briefly.
Aside from the students and Mr. O'Malley in the gym, the school is empty. Come, show me where you both were attacked.
Demi nodded and walked down the hallway. The headmistress trailed behind her a single step, and when she passed by Noah, she didn't even spare him a glance. She moved with elegant and commanding posture and grace, like an empress on inspection. Noah sighed, and his cheeks grew even hotter. They climbed the stairs to the second floor and found an empty, untouched corridor.
What the hellos? This is where we fought the monsters. There were bodies and chunks lying everywhere.
Headmistress Darboux walked the length of the hallway but said nothing. She casually glanced at the floors, ceilings, and walls with a passive interest. Demi stood still and she watched the headmistress with a pleading expression. Noah remained silent, uncertain of what he could say to make their claim more believable. He had already made an ass of himself before his big boss. Doing so again was not desirable in the least. The headmistress gently clasped her hands behind her back. Her steps were as commanding as a dancer's. The clip-clop of her heels on the floor in the empty hallway grated on Noah's nerves only slightly. When Headmistress Darboux got to the end of the hallway, she turned and walked back to Noah and Demi, and then past them. Her eyes scanned the section of the school as well, and once she got to the end of the hallway, she marched back.
There's nothing here now. Not even a trace of a presence other than ours.
But they were here.
Headmistress Darboux locked gazes with him. Her words were as sharp as tacks on the back of Noah's neck.
I didn't say they were never here, did I, Mr. Cruz?
Noah swallowed hard a little. His stomach swirled about like an anxious tornado.
No, ma'am.
Miss Vartheis, would you please be so kind as to allow me to view what you saw?
Yes, ma'am.
Demi gave the headmistress a large smile and then closed her eyes. The headmistress reached out and placed her index and middle finger on the center of Demi's forehead. Once more, the headmistress's eyes glowed with a dark blue light. The effect only lasted a few moments before the headmistress took her hand away. This time, when she locked gazes with Noah, her eyes were more critical, more curious, and more dangerous.
Mr. Cruz, you did very well against the creatures. I am quite surprised that you are so handy with a weapon. It was my understanding that you were simply a linguist.
Noah smirked a little, and he squirmed under the tremendous density of her attention.
Well, what can I say? I'm a person of many talents.
Indeed you are. It begs the question of where you learned such unique magical skills. You used a similar and unorthodox spell to restrain the students during their little spat as well. Are you truly an artificer, self-proclaimed or not? Would you be willing to teach an upper-level course based on your skills?
I am an artificer by training and a linguist by hobby. However, the contract I made with Arceados Academy is for my linguistic skills and expertise only, and I mean no disrespect. I'd rather not teach others my specific form of artificing. I hope that this will not jeopardize my employment here at Arceados Academy.
Of course it does not. You are already proving yourself to be an excellent addition to the school. You are skilled in your assigned area of instruction, you are willing to assist with extracurricular activities, you rush to aid your fellow teachers and staff.
She smiled, and yet her eyes grew wilder and more predatory.
And you arm our students with such wonderful tools.
Her mouth formed a small line under her nose.
Of knowledge.
A heavy moment of silence passed between both Noah and the headmistress, and Demi frowned a little.
Headmistress? Am I missing something, ma'am?
The headmistress didn't break eye contact with Noah.
No, Miss Vaughtheis, you haven't missed anything. Come, let us go and watch the rest of the Essence Ball practice, shall we?
She didn't move.
After you, Mr. Cruz.
Noah nodded and scuttled past Headmistress Darboux toward the staircase leading toward the first floor. Even though he didn't look back, Noah heard the dominant clip-clops of the headmistress's heels right behind him.